Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenidas, everybody. My name is Olivia Juarez. I'm the Public Land Program Director at Green Latinos, where we are bringing our conservation priorities together to hear from you today at our first Public Land Program Encuentro of the year. We want to get started with the check-in question, an opportunity for y'all to share your conservation priorities. So in the chat, I want to invite you to say who you are and what place matters to your personal history or to your community's history and why. And as we see those responses rolling into the chat, I want to call on a few people to elaborate. So hello again, everybody. If you're just joining, we're starting with a check-in question. I want to invite you in the chat to respond to this question. What place matters to your personal and or community history and why? And I'm going to call on people to elaborate while the rest of y'all are writing and responding in the chat. And we'll start with Aleda Fuentes Voles, if you'd like to elaborate a little bit while others get writing in the chat.
Oh my goodness, classic case of trying to unmute and then like just leaving the entire meeting. I'm so sorry. This is Aleda. Sorry if I came back in at an awkward time, but Olivia, I think you had given me the floor to expand a little bit on why San Antonio is important to me. As you guys know, San Antonio is, wow, so old. It's got a rich history, but sometimes tragic history when it comes to everything that's happened here. And so that's why it's important to me. It's important for me to learn about our history and also about the people that live here today. So yeah, that's why it's important to me.
Gracias, Aleda. For those who just joined, we're taking a few minutes for a check-in question. What place matters to you, your personal or community history, and why? Please enter your response in the chat. We're just calling on folks to elaborate on what they wrote before we get started with our program for the day. Adriana, would you like to expand upon Charapan and what you wrote there?
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Adriana Garcia, and I know that from both my mom and my dad's side, their families came from Charapan, Michoacan, including them. And that's a small pueblo in Michoacan with Tarascan Purepecha ancestry. And funny enough, a lot of the people that migrated from Charapan to the States settled in Compton, California. So that city has a big Charapan community centered around church. And they have kermeses, and if you like know someone from Charapan, they can connect you to other people from Charapan. So it's a pretty rich community, and it's special to me. Thank you for letting me expand.
Gracias, Adriana. One last time for the people in the back, if you just joined, we're doing a check-in question. What place matters to your personal or community history and why? Invite you to respond in the chat so we can all learn about significant places in our comunidad. And to round us off, I'd like to invite Celeste Royer to expand upon the California Central Coast.
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. So I live in San Luis Obispo County on the California Central Coast. I've lived here for half my life, and I really want to make sure that the lands that our people work on, we have a lot of agriculture in this part of California, and I just want to make sure that people have access to our beaches and oceans and coastal scrub to appreciate it. I think there's a long Latino history here in this area. I even got married out in the bluffs of the state park, 40 years ago. And so this place has become definitely home for me and want to do everything I can to protect open space. Thanks.
Gracias, Celeste. All right, everybody, thanks so much for taking the time to share a place special to you in the chat. So what's bringing us together today for this encuentro is Nuestra Historia y Herencia. Green Latinos and our Green Latinos community are forward in preserving Latino culture through public land conservation. And so we wanted to bring everybody together today to talk about campaigns going on in our comunidades to ensure that we are equitably represented across the public lands that are conserved and the stories that they tell. So I'm going to pass it on to Pedro Hernandez, public land advocate of our Green Latinos Public Land Program, to get us started.
Yeah, hey, what's up, everybody? I'm very thankful to have an extra 4 minutes to talk about history with you. Maybe to introduce myself. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm the public lands advocate. I'm a historian and environmental advocate here, and I'm actually really excited to introduce our programming today. This has been an opportunity for the collective here at Green Latinos to merge and find synergy between our heritage, our culture, the connections that we've always had with like our modern current for like activism and aiming for a better future. So a lot of this conversation is going to go between the past and the present and the future and anywhere in between. So ask your patience to just hunker down because it's going to be lots of information, but we hope at the end of this programming, folks will come away with baseline information to understand opportunities to engage in heritage conservation, but just overall providing data points to inform your everyday life and activism as well too. So maybe Cumbia, if you can go one slide behind or previous, just so we can go over the agenda. So maybe back, there we go. So yeah, so to set up the conversation with our amazing featured speakers, I'll be setting the stage with some history and some statistics and kind of like providing some information for the rest of the discussion to follow. Towards the last third of the discussion, we'll have featured speakers as well too, and a community and a kind of lightning round opportunity for folks in the audience to provide any calls to action as well to that are relevant to these issues. And so, yeah, again, feel free to jump in the chat if you have any questions or comments, and we'll be happy to address them as they come in as well too. So Cumbia, if you can go to the beginning of my presentation, that'd be great. So next one, actually. So yeah, I'm really excited to set the stage for Seila Mota Casper, who's the executive director for the amazing organization Latinos in Heritage Conservation, based in Texas, but a true force nationally as well too on the vanguard of heritage conservation research and advocacy, and individual site protections as well too. And also we're joined by Nicole, who is an amazing storyteller and has a plethora of really unique experience in storytelling for the Latinx, Latina, Latino community and about them as well too. So we have an amazing combination of practitioners and storytellers, and really like we want to have both conversations because we need to be telling stories in order to protect sites as well. So next slide. And so the big picture, and maybe I'll just make one speaker note here, is a lot of these pictures, like Sangre de Cristo here, are actually Latino heritage sites. And so we made a note to show them as much as possible in this presentation to give folks an idea of the scope and variety of the different sites as well too. So next slide. I wanted to start off again, maybe at the present point, before we look back in history. Where we're at in 2024 is that the Latino community is disproportionately impacted by the nature gap. And so a report from the Hispanic Access Foundation showed that 74% of communities of color lived in nature-deprived areas due to redlining, due to gentrification, due to land use conversion, compared to just 23% of white communities. Overall, children in the United States also have far less nature nearby, and lone communities also are more likely to experience nature deprivation. That all being said, the Latino population is the largest growing minority population in the United States and is estimated to comprise over a quarter of the US population by the year 2050. Also, we know that nature conservation and expanding protections and creating new green space is a very high priority for the Latino community as well too. And so a recent poll showed that 84% of Latinos in the West and 89% in the Chesapeake East Coast area agree that we should create new parks as well. So this is important context to set up the rest of the discussion. Next slide. And so this is a very large timeline, but I think it was, we'll share this with you. But we wanted to also set some stages, the stage for this discussion. So I took the liberty of trying to kind of like frame this conversation. And so in the 15th, 16th century, we have first contact with Europeans and indigenous communities, which disrupted large swaths of the continent. In the 18th century and 19th century, we have the modern foundation of the United States government and the institutions that will now, in modern times, administer and protect heritage sites. In the mid-20th century, we have a period where there's increased political momentum for equal rights and equity in the United States. And so this is the civil rights movement, but far much larger than that as it pertains to environmental protections. And starting from maybe the late 60s, I'm calling it the modern heritage conservation policy era, where we have things like Hispanic Heritage Week established, the Historic Preservation Fund is established, and we see even now in 2022, the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Latino opens as well. But also last year, the Historic Preservation Fund expires. And so these are really important data points. But let's go to the next slide for time. And so speaking of heritage sites, where are they? What actually are they? And one thing, maybe starting from the left of the slide, is that there's actually various types of different protections. And so you can have anything ranging from a historic park, a national monument. You can have individual sites like a school or a building or a store. There's historic districts and towns, a historic trail, a national seashore, that was new to me. National heritage corridors, heritage areas, and national parks. And so again, like there are many different ways to protect and establish a heritage site proper. But according to the National Park Service, and I know there were some staffers who signed up for this webinar, so be mindful of what I'm about to say, but I took the liberty of actually mapping these for folks to show, where some clusters were, where geographic gaps were, or are. And I'll make the note that this map is individual sites or kind of like big protected green areas. The next slide actually is historic trails, which are another part of the heritage sites component. So the caveat is that the trails are not on this map, but I'll show this in the next slide. So next slide, actually. And so as you can see, like this is another really unique way of protecting, heritage. I will make the also caveat and the note here that the specific histories that are protected and, by these heritage sites range, and there can be anywhere from, pre-colonial indigenous history to Spanish colonial history. There's also a site for it's like the Jefferson expansion site. So that's actually celebrates like westward expansion from the United States. You have some sites that protect Mexican ranchos. And more contemporaneously, you have a handful of sites that celebrate like civil rights history. So there is a diversity, even within Latinidad, as we'll call it, for the purposes of this conversation. So I want to make that note and also make another note that most of the sites here that are protected by heritage protections are often colonial. And so while they are a part of our history, the overall numbers do skew towards that bucket of history. But let's go into the numbers, the next slide. So overall, Latino heritage sites in the National Historic Register are 0.002% of the overall portfolio. Perhaps the number might skew, but it's definitely less than 1%. And the second point here, there's 24 out of the over 400 national park units that specifically preserve Latino history, which is again less than 1% here. And then overall for underrepresented communities, less than 8% of the sites in the historic register of places are associated with women, Latinos, African Americans, or other minorities. So you see the large contours of this conversation. Next slide. And so we, in addition to, establishing sites and navigating their funding, we have to acknowledge the political dynamics of where we're at. And so starting on the top left, we see that Latinos continue to face many social injustices pertaining to unaffordable housing, unreliable public transit, lack of green space, water, and air contamination. On the top right, we'll see that US Latinos say global climate change and the environment impacts local communities and is a high priority. And on the bottom left, we see that even this last year, that the Republican Party was advancing actions and bills to prohibit funding for the new National Museum of the American Latino. And so you see an active effort to curtail the efforts to protect and enhance diverse storytelling. And then on the bottom right, you see the larger context that the national park system in general has many billions of dollars in growing maintenance backlogs. And so there's a funding gap here, but next slide before I wrap up. You also see, and again, take a screenshot, we'll share this with you. So you see that the Latino community is growing. it's growing from the bottom left in the areas that have the biggest gaps of Latino heritage sites. The population more than doubled since the year 2000. And there's different countries and different stories being consisting in all this population growth as well too. So before I wrap up, I'll just say Latinos are going to continue to be part of the solution. We've always been here in this country, and we're always going to be part of the conversation moving forward. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to modernize, to indigenize, and to make more inclusive the public agencies and the public stories that we're really celebrating in this country as well too. And so I hope that, I know that was a lot, but I hope that's really just sets up the featured speakers that I'm about to pivot to. And so if we can go to the next slide. I want to introduce Selah Mota Casper, who has been an amazing colleague, and I'm so glad to have met Selah in my professional career. The Executive Director for Latinos and Heritage Conservation. And without any further ado, I'll pass it to Selah to take it away. And thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Pedro. Hi, everyone. I'm Selah Mota Casper. I'm really excited to be here with you today and share some of the work that Latinos and Heritage Conservation is doing. So just to quickly introduce myself, I am the Executive Director of LHC. I'm also a historian and a historic preservation practitioner. I've always been working at the national level in nonprofits and always working to advance and elevate Latinx heritage within the field and working arm in arm with communities on the ground. So next slide, please. Thank you. So Latinos and Heritage Conservation, as I mentioned, we are a national nonprofit, and we have been in practice now since 2014. We are celebrating our 10th year anniversary this year, which we're really excited about. And I'm excited to share some of the work that we're doing. Next slide. So as Pedro mentioned, our history is significantly underrepresented. Our history isn't being recognized, it's not being documented and protected. Our history and experiences are being erased, and there are few natural and cultural resources associated with our heritage. And so therefore, America is not learning about our history. We're not learning about our history. I certainly did not growing up in Texas. And more importantly, for many historic communities and many amazing and sacred historic, natural, and cultural resources, there's no protection for them. So we always advocate to get your sites locally designated, get them nationally designated, because in most cities, historic designation does allow for a type of review. So we're very much like Green Latinos, just advocating for more representation for all of these reasons. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share a quote that I have here in my office. It's by the late Congressman John Lewis, who was also a historic preservationist. And the quote reads, "The nation's character comes not from one ethnic, racial, or national group. Rather, it has resulted from the contributions of many groups. It is important that we all know our collective history, that the contributions of African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, and Asian Americans are recognized and included. Historic preservation must represent every community." And this quote just really speaks to me and always inspires me. So it really is the nexus of a lot of the work that LHC does. Next slide, please. So Latinos and Heritage Conservation really grew out of a very grassroots networking organization. We, about 2013, started talking. We were looking around at different conferences at the national, state, local level, realizing that there weren't many Latinxes doing this work. So we decided to start gathering, talking, and early on, like I said, it was very grassroots. And then we eventually became a 501c3. And the main work that we do is to preserve historic Latinx places and sustaining the living cultural heritage of Latinx communities. We also promote Latinx leadership and participation within the profession. Next slide, please. And we also really grew out of the idea that we wanted systemic transformation, especially at the policy level. Our vision statement is, we envision a just world that values Latinx heritage, people, and places. So that said, LHC is very, very deeply rooted in social and racial justice. We're really trying to transform the preservation and conservation movement at a national scale through policy, through community, through creative projects, through intergenerational collaborations, and anything and everything that will amplify Latinx voices and perspectives within our work. Next slide, please. So here's how we are doing that. The Abuelas Project is a multi-year digital humanities project that identifies and collects and shares the stories of Latinx places and spaces that matter most to us in the US and Puerto Rico. So this project, it is a hat tip to our grandmothers or the strong matriarchs, the cultural bearers, the abuelas that have shared our family's history across the dinner table and at family gatherings, and that has kept our stories alive. So the final product is going to be a story-driven, map-based online platform. It functions as a grassroots historical registry. We lovingly call it the People's Registry, and that's because we aren't necessarily being documented and designated, as I shared earlier. So LHC decided to create our own registry. And the People's Registry, the Abuelas Project, will have significant Latinx places, spaces, public land stories, and intangible heritage that matters most to local communities. Next slide, please. And here is a little screenshot of our Texas pilot. We started out here in Texas with just showcasing a few different story maps that would show what Abuelas is capable of. And we will be going throughout the country and crowdsourcing a lot of this. And it'll be at community level through community voice, through online submissions, through our workshops, through outreach events. And eventually here, actually next month, we're starting the new expansion throughout the Southwest and the borderlands, and then later on through national expansion. Next slide, please. But the fun one is that starting next month, we are kicking off the Abuelas Project, Route 66. And the idea around Route 66 is really asking ourselves, what is or was the Latinx experience around Route 66? Next slide, please. You know, we all know about the Anglo experience, the white experience, the Americana experience. And over the last 10 years, we've seen amazing, great research through the Green Book to talk about travel and leisure through the Green Book. And so we are really exploring various types of themes, which I won't read to you, but it's very much rooted in where Latinx communities are. So while maybe we won't be on the route, perhaps we'll be adjacent because of redlining, maybe we'll be on the other side of the tracks, but we really want to go throughout the country from Texas and through California to be able to unveil these stories. Next slide, please. We also launched the Latinx Preservation Toolkit in December. Very excited about this. And the next slide, please. Thank you. So the toolkit, it's a community resource. We came from it wanting to give equal access to information to Nuestra Comunidad. We know, because we work in the field, that our community is not being, having outreach moments. They're not being connected to traditional mainstream practices, to local, state, and federal agencies that oversee this type of practice. So we decided to create something totally free to the community, and it will demystify historic preservation and conservation. We're going to be not only creating this, but we're also going throughout the country. And we have started doing community workshops to help teach what these types of practices, what the bureaucracy, all of these crazy words that we use, all the jargon, to try to share this information to communities so that then they can be empowered and be able to preserve and conserve their own histories and sites. We're also creating curriculum around how to teach around Latinx heritage through historic, natural and cultural resources. Next slide, please. We also highlight proven practices with community doing great work. It can be anything from saving a cemetery to saving a site from demolition. But in this, we share community practices from amazing grassroots community-based groups doing work throughout the country. Next slide, please. And here's just a few highlights of the toolkit. We teach about documenting our history, about saving sacred lands. We also talk about storytelling, because so often, you know, we aren't taught how to do any of this. So through this, our hope is that we will be able to change things at the community and then through the national scales. Next slide, please. Oh, here's a fun one. We also just last month unveiled the Pequeñito Latinx Preservation Toolkit. And this is like a little baby toolkit. I call it the tiny toolkit that we gift out to youth. So here's us at a Farm Worker Appreciation Week event this past week. We were in Socorro, Texas, and we created a fun interactive resource to teach children about the environment, about growing food, and farm workers. Next slide, please. And we will also be sharing, like I said, the toolkit. It'll be Southwest focused. Our next venture for the toolkit will be to tell the untold stories of the borderlands and expanding that nationally as well through regions. And last but not least, I want to share that LHC will be having our biannual conference, Congreso 2024. We're going to be in San Diego in August. We'll focus on environmental justice, cultural conservation, among many other things. We hope that we see you there and look forward to connecting. So with that, next slide, please. I want to say muchas gracias, and here is how you can follow us. And if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out. So thank you, Green Latinos. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Selah. Dropping facts for the webinar. I always love hearing you talk. So now I have the honor of introducing Nicole, who's our next featured speaker. So we have a Q&A section after right after this. So start priming your questions. But yeah, I want to just jump right into Nicole's amazing presentation. So Nicole, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. I have my bio in the next slide. So next slide. I do like this picture though. My name is Nicole Segnini. I use she, her pronouns. I am located in Philly right now, but I am originally from Venezuela, Mérida, Venezuela, born and raised. I moved to the United States when I was 18 and went to school for broadcast journalism. Then I worked in the news business for about 4 years, and then I left that business because I could not do it anymore. I wanted to do storytelling in a different way. And so I was very, thankful that I found out about an internship at the National Park Service. And so I jumped sheep. Oh my God, I don't know how to say sheep. To the Office of Communications at the National Park Service in 2021. And that was amazing. I learned a lot of things, which a lot of those things that I learned were the things that Pedro talked about. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about that. But currently I am a digital content producer and organizer at the Wilderness Society. So next slide, please. I wanted to do something very cute here, only because I wanted to show you pictures of me when I was little, obviously. But my love for conservation, I wanted to acknowledge my parents and Venezuela, where I'm from, for basically teaching me everything I know about conservation and making me love nature and history and culture. My parents, I was very privileged to have been to a lot of places in Venezuela. Those pictures are actually in the Amazon, in the Venezuelan Amazon. And my dad was big on learning about, nature and protecting nature, but also acknowledging indigenous peoples and how they've been the stewards of the land for thousands of years. I learned about the names, the original indigenous names of a lot of places, like behind me is El Avila mountain in Caracas, but it's also Guairara Urbano, and it's I always loved hearing about our culture and indigenous peoples and how Venezuela, the heritage of Venezuela, basically. And so I just want to say thank you to them. And that made me love national parks. And that's where I am here right now. And very thankful that I found a career in public lands, storytelling of public lands. That's a picture of me at the Grand Canyon. I thought I was being Britney Spears in her music video of Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman. However, I found out last year that that was not filmed in the Grand Canyon, but it's okay. It's fine. That's me, little mini Britney Spears at the Grand Canyon. Next slide, please. And so at the National Park Service, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my time there because it shaped who I am right now and taught me a lot about public lands management, about the national park system. Like Pedro was saying, I had no idea, for example, about like the different designations of national parks, of national park system sites. I didn't know that we had national historical trails. I didn't know that, national historical parks, could be national park sites. So for me, who is someone who grew up caring a lot about the environment and nature, but also about culture and history, it was very eye-opening, and it made me very excited to work in communications of public lands, knowing that there's like so much that we are protecting on public lands here in the US. And part of it was I helped translate a website for El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro's National Historical Trail in Spanish, and that was eye-opening in itself because I didn't know about this trail. I didn't know about its history, but also it made me think more about the importance of partnerships on the ground and the importance of accessibility to materials like websites in Spanish, because a lot of towns around the trail, might have a lot of people that speak Spanish and they might not know about this National Historical Trail. So the importance of having materials in Spanish or in another language so that people can access information was something that I learned. I also helped, we updated the immigration site of the National Park Service, and that was another thing that was like, I did not know about none of these park sites that preserve and tell stories of immigrants in this country, different stories of different moments in time of immigration in this country. And that helped me, understand a little bit more of the history of this country. Even though I've been here for 12 years, every day I learned more. And then my favorite thing that I did, and that's like, I'm going to shout out someone that's here. I started a podcast where I interviewed people who either were interns at the National Park Service at the time, or were employees, young employees. And they taught me so much. I interviewed Hilary, who is also a historical preservator. And we talked about the importance of having more people, more Latinas, more historians, more historical preservators in these positions, like representing our communities, but also doing the good work and being a role model for maybe young girls who also want to get into these jobs and they don't see anyone like them doing these sorts of jobs. And so I wanted to talk about this because next slide. Oh yeah, we go. Oh yes, sorry. I was like, is this a slide? Yes. All of this work taught me a lot of things, but the main two things that that I have been thinking about since 2021 is that we need more sites, as this whole conversation is about, right? And more people. So we need more sites that preserve and amplify the stories of Latinidad in the US and other underrepresented communities. And we need more people from these communities being the ones telling these stories to people in a more genuine and passionate way. I was, Pedro again, told you most of the stats, but I have a few stats that I would like to talk about. For example, there are more national sites dedicated to preserving military history than to documenting historically underrepresented communities. And that includes Latinos, Latinx folks. There are like 73 national parks dedicated to war, violence, or the Confederacy. There's only 24% of national park sites that were designated with a primary purpose of documented historically underrepresented communities. And so there are tons of sites where we can find stories of Latinidad, but that's not the sole purpose of those sites, if that makes sense. Things have been changing, since in 2015, we didn't have a single park site that, for example, had a primary focus on LGBTQ rights, and now we have Stonewall in New York City. There were only 2 sites that were primarily focused on Asian Americans, and now we have a few more. But with that being said, there's still a lot to do because we're still, our stories are still very underrepresented in national park sites. And then about people, that's not the prime focus of what I'm talking about, or what this conversation is about. But as Pedro also mentioned, there's a nature gap, but there's also, there's a little over 17% of the agents of the NPS's full-time workforce. There are people of color, and then 5.6% are Latinos, Latinas, Latinx folks. I believe the Department of the Interior is around 14%. But it's a big deal for a lot of us, because if we don't see ourselves represented in these positions, then people and kids and communities might not feel comfortable going outside to these parks. There are a lot of parks actually that are near communities of color, near Hispanic and Latinx communities, and they don't go to these parks because they might not feel comfortable. They might not feel like they should be there, but they should, right? Public events are for everyone. So, employees should represent the communities that they serve, and be able to, represent our voices better. Next slide, please. Now, at the Wilderness Society, we believe that parks and monuments in the United States are a powerful tool to showcase the nation's diversity, and sharing stories about our history. And like Sahila and Pedro have said, there's a lot of diversity in our history, and we need to ensure that parks, monuments, and other sites and other protected sites are not only equitable in terms of access, in terms of, there are still many barriers to the outdoors and national parks, etc. But there's also, the barrier of they should tell a more inclusive and more honest part of history. They should tell more stories that it can tell a more fairer story. Fair story. I'm sorry. That's a hard word for me, but fair and equitable story of the United States history. And so, that's basically why I'm here and what I'm going to talk to you about, or I've been talking to you about. And this also is important because we are trying to get more people outside, and we're trying to help engage new generations of visitors and stewards and people that will be able to explore their shared heritage and resources in these parks, and they should be able to represent them as well. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to talk real quick. I've, as Pedro said, I've written a lot about, not a lot, I've written about our communities, and I've tried to also do a lot of stories interviewing people and about their experiences outdoors, about their experiences as environmentalists, about as conservationists, etc. Because I want, as a storyteller, I feel like my job is to amplify people's stories and to amplify the stories of places and history and teach people, but also advocate for the protection of these sites, of these stories, and new places and new sites. And so I wrote this blog, and again, Pedro told you guys all of the stats that good. But more personally, when I was doing the research for this blog, I was like, all right, I want to tell stories. Okay, I want to share parks and sites that tell different stories, and I'd like a diverse, story of Latinidad in the United States. And I was going through all these parks and all these historic sites, etc., trying to, be a little diverse in my listicle. And as I was doing that, I realized that, as we've been talking about, a lot of the sites, like existing monuments that we and parks, focus a lot on Spanish colonial history, which is, again, absolutely important, especially the way we're talking about that history, right? Especially centering Indigenous voices and Indigenous stories and their side of the story in like San Antonio missions, Tumacacori, etc., and how, colonialism and the Spaniards did shape a lot of areas across the country and Latin America as well. Those are important stories. But I also realized that there's tons of other stories that we should be telling on public lands. There's a variety of the Latina experience that is missing. And I believe that our parks and monuments should recognize these communities' achievements, celebrate their role in shaping society, in shaping entire towns, entire cities, and states across the United States, and also address the ongoing impacts of colonization and displacement on these communities and these lands. And so, I'm sorry, I'm talking too fast. Thank you for listening. But for example, yesterday I was reading online, I don't know if any of them are here, but someone started at the National Park Service an article series on salsa music and its Afro-Latino roots, and they started a podcast. It's amazing. I was like, this is incredible. I love this. And when I finished reading all of that and listening to all the episodes, I was like, all right, so where is our salsa music National Historical Park? I'm down. Just tell me, what do I have to do? I'm sure the idea is out there. I'm sure it's out there. I want to know. I will be there. I will be there. And so this just made me think about like all these stories that, that would be really cool to have on public lands. I remember traveling to, I don't know, is it the African American History Museum in DC? I forget the exact name, but I went to the museum a few years ago. Incredible museum. There was a part of the museum where they have music, because obviously most music, it's from Black folks. We would not be listening to music without Black musicians. And they had a side of Celia Cruz and salsa music and the Afro roots of salsa music. And I was like, this is amazing. Now I want an entire museum about Celia Cruz and salsa music and others, of course. But those are some of the thoughts that I have when I'm doing these types of storytelling. Like, I want to write about a lot of experiences from the Latino, Latina, and Latinx communities. And so next slide, please. And so I don't really have a lot of time to like talk about all of these sites, but I chose a few sites with different stories. And for example, I wrote about Casanova Range National Monument, which was designated last year. Yes, last year. It is a it's the Department of Defense, though. It's not a national park site, but it protects like 7,000 acres of land in El Paso, and a lot of history, but also it is, a lot of Latinx and Indigenous communities in the area have been fighting to protect this green space for many reasons. Is migration corridors, is water, clean water, etc., and also just it's green space. And Pedro also talked about this at the beginning in his talk. There's a nature gap. There's a lot of people across this country that don't have access to green spaces. And so when they have some green spaces, people want to keep that, want to protect them. And it's a right to be able to have these spaces. I also wrote about the Blackwell School National Historic Site. This is something that was a little shocking for me. I'm not from the United States, so I learned history, as I've been telling you guys, by like yesterday, I all the time. And I had no idea that there was a segregation here of Mexican Americans and Mexican kids. And so this school actually, and it was designated, I believe, in 2022, was originally established as a segregated school for the area's Hispanic community. It's in Marfa, Texas. And again, part of history that I had no idea. So these are just some of the parks that I wanted to talk about. Lowell and Blackstone River Valley preserves like history of immigrants that were coming into like the textile industry and the large mills, and then just tons of communities like Colombians, Dominicans that just stayed and are making like these areas multicultural. And I didn't know that they also were national parks. So yeah, next slide, please. And so my last thing is, let's tell a more inclusive story of the US. As we know, the history of segregation, displacement, and exploitation of US lands has been a catalyst for inequity and inaccessibility to public lands, and national parks, monuments, and other public lands preserve an imbalanced collection of cultures and stories. And so these are the types of conversations we should be having to advocate for more representation, more sites that preserve our history. And so that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Let's hear like a virtual round of applause for Selah and Nicole for those amazing presentations. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of Nicole stands in the chat right now. So we have about like 14 minutes for a Q&A section before we get into our calls to action. So hang tight, folks. We still have about so lots of content left. But I want to see if folks have any impressions or particularly questions for the speakers today. So if you have one, feel free to either raise your hand or drop it directly in the chat. And I see a question from Hilary. So please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. It was a beautiful presentation. I feel like I need some Latino sauce once in a while. I have a question. It's a general question for both Lila and Nicole. I think one of the biggest issues, I mean, when we talk about immigration across the nation, how we deal with issues with anonymity and to make and capture those stories when people are afraid of their security and safety of their families. I hope that makes sense. I can expand more if you need to.
Yeah, I can jump in. That is such a great question, Hillary. It's something that we think about quite often, especially as we are going through the Abuelas project and wondering how is it that we record these stories without putting people in fear. And I will say that people can submit for us, and anytime we're doing oral histories, we gauge the comfortability level. We ask if they want their photo taken, if they want their story told. And I think that is a best practice, is that allowing an individual, the participant, the person to lead because of their own comfortability status. And so I would say as a historian, as a practitioner, always following the direction of the person that you're working with. and building trust and respecting that too. Like if we are documenting, recording someone's history, and if they ask us not to share it, not to publicize it, that we follow through with that. So I will stop there, see if Nicole has anything to add.
I mean, same. I think that it's important to tell these stories, but it's also important to respect people. And if they don't want to talk about this, then we don't have them talking about it. But I think that as storytellers, we should still amplify, facts and situations and stories of immigration, and just respect people's if they want to be out there or not, because like you said, like there is a very understandable fear of being out there. So yeah.
Awesome, thanks. I think Dalia, was it you? I saw a hand raised, maybe?
Yes. I wanted to just comment one thing. I work in different spaces. In one of the spaces that I work with, it's National Park Service for one, and the youth programs, and I also work with the National Park Conservation Association and other entities. And there's always this emphasis on telling the Latino story, right? The impact that Latinos have had in public lands. And hardly all those stories are easy to find. I'm always digging for those stories. I'm always asking people. It is, I find it, and even now that we are, in 2 years, we'll be approaching the 250 celebration of the independence of the United States. There's still no stories easy to tell. They're not easy to find, that they're not being documented historically, and I know I'm probably touching stepping on somebody's toes saying this, but the truth is that I'm someone that is interested on the subject, that I like to bring all these stories to people and being portrayed the right way, the proper, in a way that the Latino pride is always present, instead of coming from the deficit side. But what we have brought to this country, they're not always there. And I just really wish, that since we are approaching the 250 independence celebration, and that there are people already bringing a lot of stories from different communities, that we have really a good set of stories to tell and be portrayed the proper way, not from the deficit side, but all what we have brought to this country. And I mean it in the most, I'm saying this from the really, with the most positive perspective, because I do want to bring those to the table. I want people to really appreciate all of this. This is just a comment, and I hope if anyone, if you think you have resources that I can tap into it, I really like to bring those up, because I'm involved in all these different areas that we could absolutely bring them up. That was all what I wanted to comment.
Gracias. Yeah, Seila and Nicole, I'm maybe wondering if you have any reactions to those comments.
I would say absolutely 100% agree, Dalia. We are very lucky to work with our NPS, ACHP, DOI partners, and it does come, I love your term, deficit side. Reminds me a lot of Ned Kaufman, like the deficit so much within our own practice. And I think a lot of it, and this also stems from, I think it speaks to a question that was put in the chat as well, about how we use our own voices. And that's exactly how, organizations like myself and other great practitioners throughout the field are allowing community to tell their stories. Yes, I'm a historian, I'm an academic, but I'm not going to write from an academic side. I really believe in community preservation, where community shares their own stories, they tell their own stories, tell the celebratory moments, the fractured moments, as you were speaking about, from our own perspective. And that way, the history and that experience is even more authentic. And the United States gets to learn about that through our own voices. I also will share, there was a question that Jazz put in there about allowing our own voices and the need for designation. And I will say that one thing that as practitioners, we need to recognize that the National Park Service does allow for oral histories to be a primary source for designations. And I think that gets lost at the state and local level. In my own experience, I see it be a deterrent. I recently just got a National Historic Landmark, Rio Vista Farm, designated, where the primary source and the history of the site came from braceros and oral histories, because exactly, our history isn't being documented. I researched for 3 years and kept hitting roadblocks and roadblocks and roadblocks because no one thought it important to document the actual experience of a bracero who was coming here to be contracted. We know what happened in the field, but that process wasn't documented. So in that, I think we rely so much on community to help tell us exactly their own experience, and recognize that it is a valid and primary resource rather.
Yeah, that was great. I want to do a quick time check. We have about 5 minutes for the remainder of our Q&A section before we head into the calls to action. But there's a question in the chat that I think would be really neat for both you, Nicole and Selah, to comment on. And so in particular, I think the question says, how would you balance the preservation of sites that are multicultural? For example, telling Latinx stories without erasing the indigenous people that lived here first and continue to thrive in that area. So I know maybe 2 minutes each is not justice for this, but maybe Nicole, I'm wondering if you want to go first.
Wow, thanks for calling me out. I think we should tell all the stories the more accurately we can. And I think that is to, really talk about what happened to indigenous folks, during colonization, et cetera, and not sugarcoat it. I think that a lot of us, I don't know, at least I was taught sometimes a more sugar-coated history of what happened when Colón got to Venezuela. And so I think that it's not erasing any story, it's just having both stories. And they're complex, I know that, but I think that we should just tell them all in a the more accurately way, and that is put in, like trying to find indigenous folks that tell these stories and read about, indigenous folks writing about the history of the sites, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's my take on this. Yeah.
Cool. Selah, do you want to close this out?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with Nicole. My perspective is that history is not linear, it's multi-layered. As a historian, if I'm researching a site, maybe it was indigenous, then it was Jewish, African-American, and Latinx, like that happens all the time. So I record that history as I've learned it. And I think that even though my purview and my area is with Latinx history, to do history justice, we have to come at it, in a very authentic and visible way. I also think that it's important for us to hold each other accountable and to question the systems. I sit on the Texas State Board of Review that reviews National Register nominations as they come in. So again, holding people accountable. If I see something like a Greyhound bus station that only tells the white experience, I'm going to raise my hand and ask where the Black people sat or where the Latinxes were in this history. And therefore, we're creating a standard for us as practitioners, as historians, to do a better job.
Just fire. Thank you, Sayla. And thank you, Nicole, as well, too. I think there's lots of layers, and I definitely think this is like the broader current, right, is ensuring that we're being honest and authentically communicating like our personal stories, but also like our national stories as well, too. And so I think this is probably the like perennial work for like as humans, as we're like understanding our existence as little ants or anything else like in this universe, but definitely think it's worthwhile, and I think it's very rewarding, and I hope folks are kind of like feeling that way of even just, you know, having these conversations for the last maybe 60-70 minutes or so. And so not to cut the conversation short, but maybe to continue it a different side of the same page, or maybe other side of the coin, want to pivot to calls to actions to try to resolve some of these issues that we had like talked about as well too. And so maybe if we can go to the next slide, community calls to action. I thought it was appropriate to use the Cesar Chavez National Monument as the backdrop for this next section. But I want to maybe go to the next slide and introduce Lou Medina. Sorry, I used it twice, my bad. I want to pass it to Lou Medina with Friends of the Inyo here in California to share a wonderful, cool proposal that has been cooking up. So Lou, please.
Oh,
Hi,
sorry, Lou, I'm
everyone.
gonna interrupt you real quick to give a little backdrop for this section right here. So y'all got an email from me yesterday inviting you to think of something to share as a call to action. So in this next section, before we end the call, what we're going to do is we're going to hear from Lou Medina at Friends of the Inyo, Lauren Cohen at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and then turn the mic for all of you to share your call to action for your heritage conservation priorities, and drop any links and other resources that you want people to know of in the chat. And that way we can make sure everybody who registered for this Encuentro y Más get connected to the resources. Before I pass it on to Lou, I want to give an example of how Green Latinos is working on the advocacy front to make sure that we are achieving this goal of making sure our communities are equitably represented in the stories that our public lands tell, and then the places that they protect, by quickly directing you to this blog post we made last year. You can expect in the next couple of weeks to hear from Green Latinos about a community sign-on letter asking for members of Congress to make sure that in the fiscal year 2025 appropriations rounds, that they are funding Interior, that they're funding USDA, that they're making sure that there are specific funds dedicated to cultural preservation of Hispanic and Latino cultures and histories y más. So please watch for that. You can see an example of kind of what to expect by clicking on that link there, where you can see the copy of the letter that we issued for fiscal year 2024 appropriations. I also wanted to give you all a heads up that Green Latinos is working to coordinate organizations like Latinos in Heritage Conservation, Latino Outdoors, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and more, to ask Congress to create new pathways and dedicated specific funding for telling our cultures and histories at the National Park Service. Latino and Hispanic identity has never had dedicated resources to protect and conserve and interpret our stories at the current national park units, nor create new ones. And so this is really just an informal. Please watch out for future sign-on letters, future invitations to come to the Hispanic Heritage Month fly-in and join online virtual meetings with our comunidad to help shape these goals. So I'll pause there and turn it over to Lou.
Well, thank you. And hi, everyone. My name is Lou Medina, and I'm the Communications and Philanthropy Director for a small environmental nonprofit in the Eastern Sierra Nevada region of California called Friends of the Inyo. I'm originally from El Salvador, so I like to say that I'm El Salvadorable. And I want to thank Green Latinos for the opportunity to talk to you today and tell you a little bit about this initiative. And how it started. It didn't involve a national park, but actually a state park and a for-profit business. So 2 years ago in May, I went to one of our state parks here in the Eastern Sierra. We have a lot of public lands here. And it was my first time there. When I got to the gate, I pulled out a $20 bill to pay for my admission fee. And the ranger said he wasn't someone who was authorized to handle cash. That person was out. And so could I pay with a credit card? Okay, no problem. I took out my credit card, paid, and then forgot all about it. Then later that year in the summer, I went up for a drive north of Bishop, where I live, to another town that has a popular brewery with an outside seating area. And when I went to order my beer, I noticed that that business only took credit, debit, or Apple Pay as payment. So, okay, fine, take out my credit card, pay, and I got my beer and I was enjoying it in the courtyard, but then I looked off to the side and there was some construction going on in a building next to the courtyard. And of course, the construction workers were Latinos, they looked like immigrants. And then all I could think about was, oh my God, at the end of their workday, after they've been working really hard and maybe they're thirsty, if they wanted to come have a beer at the brewery, they couldn't if they didn't have a credit card. Because we know that a lot of these folks get paid cash. A lot of them are unbanked. And so then that triggered the memory of my experience at the state park. And I actually called the state park to find out, well, what would have happened if I didn't have a credit card that day? What would have happened if all I had was cash? And the ranger or the person who answered the phone said, well, we would have taken your money, but we wouldn't have been able to give you change. And so that really made me very indignant about how if the legal tender in this country is the US dollar, that should be accepted in any form, including cash. But then I started seeing headlines in the news about how national parks were starting to go cashless, and they gave their reasons, saving money and, for safety reasons, not having to hire an armored vehicle to take the money to the bank every now and then. Last year in the spring, Death Valley National Park announced that they were going to start going cashless as of June, which they did. Another national park near my area, Yosemite, is also cashless. And then in doing research on how difficult it is for people of color to access nature because of many factors, cost, distance, lack of familiarity with recreation, in the great outdoors, no time. A lot of the people out here work more than one job because cost of living is high. They can't take time off to go and spend a week in the backcountry. Well, then I just saw this cashless entry as being another barrier to access, just like having to reserve camping spaces online ahead of time in websites that are difficult to navigate and usually in English, right? So in between all this, I was working with Green Latinos on the Latino Climate Justice Framework, especially the chapter dealing with equity and access. And I went to Washington, D.C. with them for their fly-in in October of 2022. And during the event, when they were revealing the Latino Climate Justice Framework, my muse hit me. And then I thought, what if the US government were to give a national park pass as a welcome to America gift to every new American citizen at swearing-in ceremonies? And I thought, oh my God, when I had my swearing in, all I could think of was, I'm going to be able to vote now, and I can register to vote right here on the spot. I can just imagine if on top of that, I would have gotten a national parks pass, I would be using it left and right. I would be using it all the time, taking people to discover national parks with me, and it would be a source of pride, right? It would also help to fix this cashless access problem that we have going on. Would make people feel welcome. They would take family members with them, introduce them to our beautiful national parks. And what I love about Green Latinos is that they saw this, they saw the possibilities, they encouraged me, they've helped me. Friends of the Inyo is a very small regional nonprofit. We could not, put together an initiative at the national level like Green Latinos could. So with their help, this is where we find ourselves now. And I think that this is a really important time because when immigrants are being vilified by some extreme folks in society, this is a great opportunity to uphold naturalized citizens as deserving of respect and our embrace because, one, they have resided legally in the United States for a minimum of 5 years. They've paid taxes. They've kept a clean police record. They've had to take a test, a language test and a history test. And they pay upwards of $700 in fees for citizenship. So this is a great thing that it's a bipartisan effort really that everyone can get behind. So I'm sure that a lot of you who are on this call already got the e-blast. If you haven't, I think that Green Latinos can share that link for the sign-on letter. There it is. And then at the very bottom of the sign-on letter, there's also an opportunity for individuals to sign a petition. So it's a two-pronged approach, but by the 17th of this month, we want to get that letter signed by various organizations. And I want to encourage you to not just think in terms of nonprofits, but especially if you live in areas where there are national recreation areas, get your Chamber of Commerce to sign this letter because it's in their best interest to draw tourists. Get faith-based organizations. If you have a line to like your local Catholic parish or your local diocese, it would be great to get support from the faith-based community around this effort. And so I'm going to stop talking now because I think I get excited talking about this because I think it's such a simple thing, but it's something that so many people can get behind. And I want to thank Green Latinos for seeing the value in this and just really helping to put this together. Already, we only launched this on Monday, and already there's more than 24 organizations that have signed on. And so I'm just, hoping that by the 17th, we might have 100, maybe 200, or even more. If all of you can reach out to your networks, we can really make this mushroom. Thank you.
Gracias, Lou. Thank you for bringing your wisdom and experience to change access to national parks and recreational lands for all of our communities. Now I'm going to pass it to Lauren Cohen at the National Historic Chest. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Cumbia.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Lauren Cohen. I'm the Associate Director of Government Relations for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I'm based here in Washington, D.C., but our work is nationwide for sure. Thank you so much for allowing me to highlight the Historic Preservation Fund and an important call to action today. I'm really honored to be hearing from all of you and learning so much and just be able to be in this space with you. So thank you for inviting me. It's really, really clear that support for more places and histories, often intentionally omitted histories and intentionally forgotten places, that support is critical. And so we, have pathways of advocacy to try to make that happen. And so I'll talk just a little bit about the Historic Preservation Fund. Many of you are already probably very familiar with the Historic Preservation Fund, but this is the principal way that the United States federal government supports historic preservation efforts in this country. It is under the National Park Service. And so these are the many components of the Historic Preservation Fund that you're seeing in front of you there. Two chief things are support for SHPOs, State Historic Preservation Officers, and TIPOs, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. But then there are 7 other competitive grant programs that you'll see. You may be familiar with several of them, to include the underrepresented grants, underrepresented community grants, but lots and lots of other ones that support historic preservation efforts in this country. Next slide, please. So the Historic Preservation Fund is annually appropriated, which means that it has to every single year go before the House and Senate Appropriations Committee. That committee is who decides how much money the Historic Preservation Fund gets, how much money goes to those SHPOs, those TIPOs, and all of those competitive grant programs. We've seen a wonderful upward trajectory of support for the Historic Preservation Fund. It is bipartisan support, I will note that. The high water mark was in 2023 with $204 million for the Historic Preservation Fund. It did take a dip in the recently enacted 2024 appropriations bill. And we're trying to be vigilant about what that dip means and what that support means. So we're trying to be really active with advocates, talking to their members of Congress, telling them what the Historic Preservation Fund means to them and to their communities, and what increased support could mean for telling more stories and saving more places. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick zoom into the recent appropriations, what's gone to these many components of the Historic Preservation Fund. What's in the box there is what was recently enacted, very late, like 6 months late, but just a few weeks ago that was enacted. But the National Trust for Historic Preservation and many other national and statewide preservation nonprofits have come together to agree on what our asks are for fiscal year 2025. That should say 2025 there at the top of the NTHP request. But that's what we're asking for the next year for these mini accounts, so that we can see more histories saved. So I will put a link in the chat. You can go to savingplaces.org, that link there, and learn more about the Historic Preservation Fund, and you can take action. Next slide, please. One of the many important things that we do every year is produce an appropriations report. So you can find that at that website, or it's even at the link that I just dropped in the chat as well. You'll be able to read through that, see some of these select priorities that we like to highlight that save historic places across the country and how they're funded. I think it's really important that we understand how things are funded. We understand that, then we understand how to advocate for more funding. So I encourage you to read through that report. It's really good. We send it around to every single congressional office and every single appropriate committee office on Capitol Hill. So staffers are reading this. It's in the hands of the committees that are writing this legislation. So it's important for them to see that too. Another link that I will put in the chat for you really quick, and we can go to the next slide here. I'm trying to wrap up really fast. Is the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Action Center. You're going to see a lot of ways to take action right there from your computer. Just a couple clicks to get in contact with your members of Congress about things that are very important to you. One of those ways is to encourage the Historic Preservation Fund's reauthorization. Pedro, at the beginning of our session today, mentioned that the Historic Preservation Fund actually, the authorization for this program expired last year. So it's a little bit complicated. It can be appropriated even if it's not authorized, but it's important for it to be authorized so it continues to show the commitment to historic preservation efforts by members of Congress. They created this program. It's at the National Park Service, so we need to be committed to that. And this legislation here that you see on your screen is the Historic Preservation Fund Reauthorization Act. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation, but what's really great about it, not only would it reauthorize the program, but it would increase the authorized amount that would go into that program. So right now it's authorized at $150 million. As you may recall, we've already surpassed that in the fiscal year 2023 appropriations, but this would authorize it to go up to $250 million. So that's so many more potential grant programs that we could look into. Olivia and Pedro have had, and Selah as well, have had wonderful conversations about thinking about how we can stand up another competitive grant program specifically for this work that you're all doing And so that can be conceptualized if the authorized amount goes up, right? So I would encourage you to take action there. In that action center, there's other ways to take action to include making Route 66 a National Historic Trail. Selah mentioned her wonderful project with the Abuela Route 66 project. So there's a way to take action just to make it a National Historic Trail. You can take action on a lot of different things. But one last link I will leave you with is a way to sign up for a newsletter that the National Trust Government Relations team, that's me and a few other colleagues, we send out a monthly newsletter of things that are going on Capitol Hill that pertain to historic preservation, and ways that folks can take action. So you can sign up for that newsletter via that link right there. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Muchas gracias, Lauren. So we went a little over, so if you have to jump at 1:30, that's all good, but we're going to be able to stay on and give y'all an opportunity to share your calls to action. Cumbia, if you can go to the next slide, please. So what I want to invite you to do is use the raise hand function to enter the queue. And I hope you practice your elevator pitch because you'll have about 30 seconds. I'm not going to time you on our system to share how others can support your heritage conservation priorities and other related campaigns. If you need to share contact info or other links, please drop them in the chat. I'll save them and make sure that they get sent out to the Green Latinos Comunidad in our follow-up email. So go ahead and raise your hand and enter the queue. And I saw Doña Dalia raise your hand. So I'll invite you to get started.
Oh, I wasn't going to give my pitch. I wanted to ask Lauren something. And is that okay? A quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, Lauren, I see the spreadsheet with all the investments, is all of that. I can, in every line, you can find something about African Americans, then you find about tribal stories. Will there ever be something that says Hispanic Latino stories?
That's a wonderful question, Dahlia. And that's something that Olivia and Pedro and Selah and I have been talking about recently, about how we can set up, how we can conceive and set up support for such a competitive grant program within the Historic Preservation Fund. This has to get a groundswell of congressional support. And so we're talking through avenues of how that can happen. Key to making something like that possible is making sure that the Historic Preservation Fund is funded at a very high level. We want to make sure that there's a lot of money going into this Historic Preservation Fund so that a new grant program or maybe a different avenue can be set up to specifically go toward preserving and saving these histories. Yeah, it's absolutely something that we've been thinking through and talking through. I've recently been brought into the conversation, but Olivia and Pedro and Selah have been leading that work, and I'm honored to come in as I can. But that's a great question, Dahlia.
Yeah, the most I can say is stay tuned in the upcoming weeks and months to see what we got cooking there.
And get in contact with us if you want to be a part of the Brain Trust that is advancing this new initiative. So back to y'all. If you're feeling a little camera shy, I welcome you to share your call to action and any links in the chat. But otherwise, I'll break for a moment and see if any of y'all want to come off mute.
I'll go ahead. Hi, everybody. My name is Brianna Nunez. I am the program manager on the History and Culture team at the National Park Foundation. I could go on and on about what all that means, but skipping to the what to come to me for is if you are working as a nonprofit or as a volunteer association, or if you're working in any way with a national historic monument or park site, give us a call and we can see how we can support you, because we do often partner with smaller community organizations, and we are always looking to support those doing the work in the area. And I see that Ruth has also raised her hand, one of my colleagues at the National Park Foundation. So I will share my information in the chat and I will hand it over to Ruth.
Thank you, Brianna. I'm Ruth Hernandez Prescott. I'm the Chief of Staff at the National Park Foundation, and I'll just add on to what Brianna just said. We're going to go live. If Brianna checked me on this, we may already be out in the market with an RFP for inclusive storytelling. So I invite anybody on this call who represents a partner organization that works with a National Park Service site, who is looking for funding for a story that advances what we've been talking about today, this more complete and forthright story of our nation and its founding, to check out our website, be looking for that RFP. We're hoping to award about $4 million worth of grants through that process. So fingers crossed that we've got the philanthropy to cover that, but that's our goal for this year. So thanks.
Thank you both so much. Natalie.
Hi, hello everybody, and thank you so much for everyone for this amazing virtual event. My name is Natalie de la Torre Salas. I am Boricua and I am a public archaeologist here in Southwest Florida. By public archaeologist, I pretty much means that although I'm interested in what people have been up to for thousands of years, but I'm more interested in how people nowadays engage with the past and archaeology, and obviously all of the environmental and natural components of that. I want to put my name out there, and I'm going to put in the chat website and my contact information. I work for the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and my goal as a public archaeologist for Southwest Florida is to engage more Latinx communities into our local heritage and equal access to nature as well. I've been trying for the last 2 years to partner with more local museums in order to tell Latinx stories. And hopefully we're going to launch a small project called Este Lugar Importa, where we're going to try to get members of the community to actually identify the places that are important to them and put them be able to identify it. Because if we're not able to identify those sites that are important for our communities, we won't be able, to preserve them, protect them. And that is why we're also trying to be able to see which Latinx heritage sites are at risk from climate change. There's a lot around climate change and what sites are being eroded, archaeological sites, historic museum, cemeteries, etc. But like you guys mentioned with the data, there's so little registered in the National Register of Historic Places that if we don't know, how can we proactively, mitigate and protect them from the impacts of climate change? So I can talk about this all day long. I am just very excited to be able to connect with you all. I want to be able to collaborate and work with you all. And if you are in Florida, South, North, whatever, I would love to meet with you in person as well. So please reach out to me, and thank you again for this opportunity and sharing all of this.
Gracias, Natalie. Okay, we'll pass it to Dalia and Hillary before wrapping up.
Oh my God, me again? I'm sorry. No, okay, I just wanted to say that I see my name there. I'm in the board of trustees of the National Park Conservation Association. And we do a lot of, my job in that board has been to bring the voice of Latinos. And something that I do intentionally. And the stories for me are critical. Just creating new parks. The last one that I've seen, and probably the only that I've seen that has been created telling the stories of Latino, is Blackwell, that I saw a picture that you posted that a little bit. Anyway, I love to hear about that. I really want to portray our stories with the independence and the celebration in 2 years. And that has to start from now. We have to bring those stories now. Anyway, that's all what I wanted to say out there. And please do reach out. I'll copy my email there. And if anyone thinks they can support this, I'm happy to bring that aboard.
Gracias, Dalia. I'll make sure everybody gets your contact info. And finally, Hillary.
Hello, everyone. Last but not least, I'm Hilary Morales. I'm a director of Future Engagement and Educational Research at Columbus Landmarks. My background is in preservation and architecture, so I'm a preservation architect, if you want to call it that way. So I work with Nicole and Dahlia in Washington, D.C. It's great to see you all in this room. We work hard on preserving Latino heritage sites in D.C. So anyways, I'm in Columbus Landmark Foundation, which is in the Midwest in Ohio. So my call to action is like, if you guys know any organization in the Midwest that are doing this type of work, because it's a huge gap in research of Latino heritage in the Midwest, even though it's extremely growing population in communities because the Midwest has become one of the most affordable areas in the nation, but it means that we have to create a framework to capture these stories just for the future. I know, like Sahila, we're meeting next week, so thank you. I'm excited to discuss further about our collaboration. Also, we're working with State Historic Preservation Office in Ohio and Heritage Ohio to make sure that we do this in a very sensitive way, and also making sure that we are doing the right thing. Just because Latino communities are diverse and geographically it's also diverse. So understanding the nuance of geographic location is extremely important in the conversation as well. Anyways, that's my call to action. I'm gonna share the link of our organization. I know Columbus is such a contested, I have problems with it as well. But it is what it is, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Hillary, and to all of you for taking the leap and sharing your calls to action and opportunities for these really important connections with everybody here. That's what Green Latinos is about. We advocate together, we convene together, we commiserate together, we celebrate together, because this is what it takes. This is the power that is going to get us to 30 by 30 equitably and improving public health outcomes for everybody. So before I pass it to Pedro, if you'll give it to the next slide, please. This opportunity is not the only time and only way for you to get the support and the power of the Green Latinos Comunidad behind your priorities. So I want to quickly let you know of other ways that you can do that. Contact me and Pedro, our public land program, and you'll get our contact info on the next slide. If you want to publish a blog post on greenlatinos.org where you can write about and share more calls to action, your thoughts, your experiences in public land and heritage conservation. We also send out a monthly newsletter from the Public Land and Ocean Colectivo that can be populated with a blurb from you. So any new reports that you're releasing, any interesting news that you're getting relevant to our public land and ocean conservation priorities, fun facts, stories. This is a resource for you to get your priorities out there in our comunidad. So contact Pedro, or I'll drop in a link where you can submit a blurb for our monthly newsletter. Next, these encuentros are also your space. Contact us if you would like Green Latinos to feature your campaign's priorities, discussion topics, workshops, and more on Zoom. We're getting together about every other month at this point and can always do more. And then finally, our Public Land and Ocean Colectivo hosts a Google group, a community listserv that gives you access to everybody's inbox to reach out, make connections, share resources, find help, and more. So become a member of Green Latinos at the greenlatinos.org/join link. So you can join the colectivo. We'll get you on that listserv and be connected. So I'll pass it back to Pedro to round us off for the afternoon.
Yeah, sure. Wow, that was fun. Thanks for everyone for holding on as long as you have. Maybe if we can just get to that last slide, Cumbia, so we can just make sure our our contact information is out there. But maybe in a nutshell, I want to say thank you so much. This honestly has been a conversation I've always wanted to have. I actually want to use my college degree for once. But we want to be ambitious. We want this to actually work. We want to like continue to have more conversation and build more space and have this conversation and celebrate like all the work y'all are doing as well too. So please, 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 let's be in touch. We have an opportunity to like build a like Latino, Hispanic, whatever you call it, heritage program together from the ground. And so like this is our moment. So yeah, let's be in touch. Let's be friends. And thank you again, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. And I hope you had a little bit of fun today. So again, I appreciate it and take care.